The biggest target of Trump's tariffs so far, though, has been China.
Donald Trump has doubled down on his threat of tariffs. Trade war between the US and China has just kicked off.
China released its slew of countermeasures, pretty extensive this time round compared to the previous round in February.
The US imposed new charges on goods imported from Canada, Mexico and China.
And economists are worried that we could be on the brink now of a real trade war between China and the US.
Rubio miscalculates US leverage on China. Nullified, China halts imports, biggest winner emerges. Recently, Australian energy giant Woodside Energy announced a milestone long-term agreement with China Resources Gas Company. Starting in 2027, Woodside will supply approximately 600,000 metric tons of liquefied natural gas, LNG, annually to China for 15 years. This is Woodside's first independently signed long-term sales contract with a Chinese buyer. Under the agreement, LNG deliveries to China Resources Gas will begin in 2027. With a stable annual supply of 600,000 metric tons for 15 years. This steady supply framework offers long-term security for optimizing China's energy structure, while opening up an important growth market for Australian LNG exports. In response to the U.S. imposing a 10% tariff on Chinese exports to the U.S., China announced it will impose retaliatory tariffs starting February 10, 2025, on certain goods originating from the U.S. This includes a 15% tariff on LNG imports. Bloomberg reported that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio claimed in January that LNG should be used as a bargaining chip in trade negotiations. However, China did not cooperate. This spells bad news for U.S. natural gas companies seeking contracts to kickstart new projects. In another report from January, Bloomberg noted that China's efforts to diversify its key energy supplies have shown results, and its push for energy self-reliance has hindered the kind of energy deals the Trump administration had hoped for. Data shows that U.S. LNG carriers have vanished from Chinese waters, with what used to be 400,000 tons of monthly imports dropping to zero, marking the longest interruption in China-U.S. LNG trade since June 2023. The difficulties for U.S. energy companies are becoming apparent. A Morgan Stanley report pointed out that the Chinese market accounts for 5.4% of U.S. LNG exports. Losing this key buyer could cost U.S. companies approximately $1.5 billion annually. Even more critically, Chinese buyers are reselling contracted U.S. LNG to Europe, further squeezing U.S. market share globally. In other words, U.S. LNG barely qualifies as a supporting role in China's energy portfolio. So, where does China's confidence come from? The answer lies in one word: diversification. In recent years, domestic natural gas production has steadily increased. In just the first 2 months of 2025, industrial-grade natural gas output in China rose 3.7% year-on-year. At the same time, pipeline gas from Russia and Central Asia has continued to increase, and combined with LNG supplies from Qatar and Australia, China has long shed its reliance on any single source. The proportion of seaborne LNG imports is gradually declining. Earlier this year, the U.S. Secretary of State tried to threaten China using LNG as a bargaining chip, but the tactic was clumsy at best. Currently, China's largest LNG import source is Australia, with 26.19 million tons imported in 2024 at a cost exceeding 100 billion yuan. Qatar ranked second with 18.34 million tons, and Russia third with 8.3 million tons. It's worth noting that this is the first time in many years that China has signed a 15-year energy supply agreement with Australia. After suspending imports of relevant U.S. energy, Australia, with its abundant resources, may receive even more orders. Back in 2021, under former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, Australia blindly followed the U.S. lead in confronting China, which led to a collapse in China-Australia trade relations. Australian products like barley, beef, and wine were shut out of the Chinese market. Meanwhile, the U.S. rushed in to seize the Chinese market share left behind by Australia. But now, the tables have turned, and it's Australia's turn to sideline the U.S. It's well known that one major reason Morrison lost office was the deterioration of China-Australia relations under his leadership, which brought massive economic losses and domestic political pressure. Now, similar pressure is mounting on Donald Trump. However, some worry that China's halt on U.S. LNG purchases may sever ties between the world's largest LNG producer, the U.S., and its largest buyer, China, further intensifying trade disputes. Recently, the Chinese embassy in the U.S. made its position clear. No matter the type of conflict, China is fully prepared. If Trump insists on provoking friction, then China will match him step for step. Backing down would only embolden the U.S. to press harder and escalate further.